The city of Chicago stretched out like a glittering canvas beneath the cold night sky. A portrait of ambition and steel. From the 52nd floor, James Reynolds had once ruled this kingdom. His office, once perched atop the Reynolds Financial Tower, had been lined with polished mahogany, whisper-quiet executive assistants, and the kind of power that made men pause before speaking. Now, his view came from a cracked window on the 3rd floor of a building with peeling paint and a flick. Here in hallway light, James sat motionless in a threadbare armchair, the dim lamplight casting long shadows across the room. Around him were the ruins of a life built on brilliance and trust and, ultimately, betrayal. The penthouse was gone. So were the Italian cars, the Hampton summer estate, and the 6-digit Rolex that used to rest on his wrist like a badge of honor. In their place, an open mail stacked like tombstones on the kitchen counter, a sagging bookshelf with legal folders he hadn't touched in weeks, and a single crystal tumbler half full of aged whiskey, the last relic of his old world. He took a slow sip, letting the amber fire burn down his throat, hoping it would dull the noise in his mind. But the memories returned like vultures. The boardroom, the stock ticker bleeding red, the panic calls, and then the silence when Victor Blackwood, his business partner of 30 years and the man he once considered a brother, turned off his phone for good. James could still see the smirk on Victor's face that day, just before the sex stormed in. It was an anger that haunted him. It was the betrayal. Victor hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen the legacy. Reynolds Financial wasn't built on luck. It was built on gut instinct, tireless calculation, and sacrifices that left James divorced, childless, and alone. And in 6 weeks, it had all unraveled like a threadbare suit. The television murmured in the background, another financial pundit, dissecting the Reynolds collapse with smug enthusiasm. James muted it with the remote, his hand trembling. Slightly earlier that morning, the doctor had warned him about his blood pressure. "You're a walking stroke, Mr. Reynolds," she said with clinical bluntness. "Whatever stress you're clinging to, let it go, or it'll kill you. Let it go. Let go of 30 years. Let go of every sleepless night spent building an empire brick by brick. Let go of the identity etched into news columns and financial journals." Reynolds didn't know how to be anyone other than the man he used to be. Now, stripped of the title, the staff, the suits, he was a ghost in his own life. His phone buzzed once, an old colleague, no doubt calling out a curiosity masked as concern. He let it go to voicemail. They didn't care. Not really. People lacked success. They tolerated failure. But ruin, that was contagious. He stood and walked to the window, pressing his forehead to the cool glass. Below, the city kept moving, unbothered by the fall of a man who once moved its markets. The lights of the financial district blinked like distant stars, cold and impersonal. One of those towers still bore Victor's new logo, sleek, modern, hollow. James's reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, unshaven jaw. A man weathered not by time, but by humiliation. In the silence, his voice cracked. "What did I leave behind?" he asked, not expecting an answer. "What legacy?" The glass, like the city beyond it, remained indifferent. The wind off the Chicago River was especially cruel that night. It cut through James Reynolds' coat like razors as he wandered the streets, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, the last of his savings folded into a worn money clip. He had walked aimlessly for nearly an hour, pretending it was for exercise, but in truth, he couldn't stand to be in that apartment anymore. The silence there was too loud. Every corner whispered failure. Every tick of the clock reminded him he was just waiting for something, anything to matter again. He turned down a narrow alley behind Jefferson Street Market, a shortcut he hadn't taken since college. The smell of rotting vegetables and wet cardboard lingered in the air. He was about to pass through when a flash of movement caught his eye, just a shadow at first, ducking behind a stack of wooden crates. He stopped, listened, a soft grunt. Something or someone was there. James stepped forward cautiously. "Hey, who's back there?" Silence. Then, a small voice, dry and hoarse. "Don't call the cops." A girl emerged, slowly, warily. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her coat was 3 sizes too big, frayed at the cuffs, patched with duct tape. One shoe had no laces. Her eyes, those eyes were a sharp, almost uncomfortable shade of gray, like smoke after a house fire. They didn't plead. They measured him. James blinked. I'm not trying to." He paused. "Are you okay?" "I'm not bleeding," she said flatly. "So yeah, I'm okay." She turned her back and bent over a pile of discarded grocery crates. From behind one, she pulled out a crumpled paper bag. Inside were the half-eaten bagels and what looked like a bruised apple. "Dinner," she muttered. "You want some? You gotta trade." James felt something twist in his chest. "Trade information," she said, straightening up. "You tell me something useful. You get half the bagel. That's the deal." He almost laughed, but didn't. "That's efficient." "Desperate," she corrected. "Efficient would be stealing from the high-end sushi bar down the block. But their cameras are better." She bit into the apple, eyes never leaving his. James had met heads of state, billionaires, Wall Street wolves, but never a child who looked at him like this, calculated, emotionally locked, like she'd already filed him into a mental category, harmless, useless, or dangerous. "What's your name?" he asked. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "What's yours, James?" She seemed to consider it. "You're the guy from the news, right? The one who lost all that money." He flinched. "Reynolds," she said, almost to herself. "You used to own the tower with the blue lights. Now you walk alone through alleys like everyone else. Funny." James took a slow breath. "You read the news, library, public computers." "I read everything. You live out here." She didn't answer that. Instead, she zipped her oversized coat up to her chin and sat down on a milk crate like it was a throne. "I don't beg," she said. "I do work, clean up trash, help old folks carry groceries, organize shelves for the corner bookstore. I don't need pity." James nodded slowly. "Fair." He stood there for a long moment, unsure what to do. Then, without thinking, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the last $20 bill he had. He held it out, unsure why, maybe guilt, maybe instinct. She didn't take it. "I said I don't beg." "It's not charity," James said. "It's payment for dinner. I haven't eaten either." She narrowed her eyes. "Then you'll sit over there." She pointed to an overturned crate. "We split the bagel. You talk. I decide if it's worth the food." James smirked despite himself. "That's reasonable." They ate in silence at first. The cold made his fingers stiff, but the bite of stale bread felt grounding, almost sacred. It wasn't about the food, not for her, and somehow, not for him either. After a while, she asked, "You ever think you were too smart for your own good?" James blinked. "Sometimes. Me too." She said, "I see patterns. In people. In numbers. In things I shouldn't understand but do. That's why I don't go to shelters. People don't like girls who talk too much or know too much." There was a pause. "What's your name?" he asked again. "Leela," she said finally. "Just Leela." James studied her for a long moment. There was something unusual here. Something he couldn't quite name. She wasn't just homeless. She wasn't just clever. She carried herself like someone trained. Someone self-taught in ways that didn't make sense. "You ever thought about leaving this life?" he asked carefully. She looked at him, suspicious. "Why? You going to take me to your mansion and raise me as your lost princess?" "I don't have a mansion anymore." "Then you're probably the most honest adult I've met all year." He chuckled, then surprised himself. It had been weeks, months since anything made him laugh. James didn't know it yet, but that night, everything changed. Not just for her, but for him too. Because Lila wasn't just a girl with a sharp tongue and a hidden past. She was something more, and the world had no idea what was coming. Ass checked. The door creaked open like an old secret being whispered, and for the first time in months, James Reynolds wasn't walking into silence. He stepped into the apartment, and instead of the low hum of despair that usually greeted him, there was a presence, a pulse. Leela stood in the middle of his living room like a stray cat trying to look unimpressed with her new shelter. Her oversized coat had been shed and hung over a chair. Beneath it, her clothes were threadbare but clean, and her hair wet from a recent shower dripped slowly onto the hardwood floor. She held a remote in her hand, flipping through news channels with clinical detachment, pausing only on financial reports. "You actually watch this garbage," she muttered, not looking at him. James dropped the plastic bag of groceries onto the counter. "I used to be the garbage," Lila smirked. "You were news. Now you're just commentary." She didn't ask permission to stay. She hadn't begged to come, but after their strange, quiet meal behind the market, James had found himself saying, "I've got an extra room." And she had followed, just like that. No questions, no fear. Now, she was treating his apartment like her temporary headquarters for a reconnaissance mission. and James couldn't decide if he found it infuriating or fascinating. He poured himself a glass of water, watching her from the kitchen. "How old are you, Leela?" "12. She answered quickly. "You said 10 yesterday." "I lied." He nodded. "Why?" "Because I didn't know if you were a creep or a savior." "Still not sure." There was no hesitation in her voice, no apology. She studied people like chessboards, every word calculated, every glance stored away like data. James leaned against the counter. "Where are your parents? Dead, or drunk, or never existed?" "Depends who you ask." "Do you know?" She finally turned to face him. "Does it matter?" That answer landed hard. He had no rebuttal. She returned her attention to the television. CNBC, the host was dissecting a recent market crash. James recognized the numbers. He could still read stock movement like others read poetry. But Leela, she studied them. "You know, what's wrong with their model?" she asked suddenly. James raised a brow. "Excuse me." She pointed at the ticker on the screen. "They're weighting volatility too heavily. If they shifted risk tolerance by just 2 points, the predictive arc would flatten. They're chasing shadows." James felt his spine straighten. "How do you know that?" "I don't know it. I see it." "You see what?" She turned to him, eyes hard and shining. "Patterns." He stared at her. "Have you ever been in school?" She laughed bitterly. "Once, they gave me crayons and told me to color inside the lines. I solved the math problems on the back of the placemat instead. Teacher said I was disruptive. Principal said I was strange. I said they were boring. Got kicked out." James felt a chill. This wasn't just street smarts. This was something else. Something that didn't belong on a sidewalk with bagels and bruised apples. He crossed the room, grabbed a legal pad, and scribbled a complex formula one his own analysts had struggled with years ago. He handed it to her wordlessly. Leela stared at it for no more than 5 seconds, then began to write. Her hand moved fast, confident. 3 minutes later, she handed the paper back. The solution wasn't just correct, it was cleaner than any version he'd ever seen. She'd even simplified the variables. James felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I already told you," she replied. "Just Leela." That night, after she had fallen asleep on the couch curled into herself like a secret, James sat at the kitchen table, staring at the formula. The numbers weren't just right. They were elegant, beyond college level, beyond professional. He opened his laptop, looked at market projections, then at her correction. It worked. It predicted movement with 12% more accuracy than the current algorithm. He had once paid a team $3 million to develop. He felt a knot in his chest, not fear, not hope, both. He got up and walked to the couch, careful not to wake her. She looked impossibly small beneath the blanket, like a child lost in a grown-up world. But that wasn't the truth. She wasn't lost. She was hiding, and something told James. She wasn't just hiding from poverty or broken systems. She was hiding from something far more dangerous. And the world, especially the financial world, had no idea that buried inside a forgotten girl was a brain that could bend its rules. Tomorrow, he would ask her more. Tonight, he would sit by the window again, but this time, not in defeat. This time, with a spark, a dangerous one, because for the first time since his fall, James Reynolds had just found something more valuable than money, a girl who could see what no one else could. And the question now wasn't if she was a genius. It was, what would the world do when it realized she existed? Asked Chad. They came for the story, not the truth. 3 days after James took Leela in, a blurry photo surfaced online, an image of the two of them walking out of a local diner. James in his frayed coat, Leela beside him holding a to-go bag like a briefcase. Someone had added a caption, "From Wall Street to welfare dad. Bankrupt mogul adopts homeless girl." It exploded. By noon the next day, his name was trending again, not for bankruptcy, not for betrayal, but for weird behavior. Talk shows speculated whether James had gone mad, whether Leela was a publicity stunt, or worse, a fabricated miracle prodigy for a desperate redemption arc. Former colleagues laughed behind plastic smiles on air. One of them, a man James had mentored personally for years, smirked and said, "Guess Reynolds is playing charity to get back into the game. Can't blame the guy for trying." But they didn't know what James knew. They hadn't seen Leela solve probability matrices in her head while brushing her teeth. They hadn't watched her correct a CNN economic projection, using nothing but the back of a napkin and a red crayon. James didn't care what they thought. Not anymore. What shook him was how unshaken Leela was. She read the headlines, saw the comments, sat with him on the old sofa while a news anchor ridiculed him as a man who went from billionaire to babysitter. But she didn't flinch. They're predictable. She said simply, "Or people project power through mockery. It's cheap, not dangerous." James looked at her, stunned. "Where did you learn to say that?" She shrugged. "You think libraries only carry fairy tales?" What was dangerous, however, was what happened next. It began with a phone call. James was invited to speak at a local investment expo. Not a headliner, just a 10-minute slot on a back panel. Most believed he'd show up bitter, drunk, or not at all, but something in him had begun to shift. Lila's presence wasn't just reshaping his mind, it was daring him to reclaim it. "I want to come," she said the night before. "It's a business expo." He replied, "I am business," she said without smiling. "You need someone who can see the angles you can't anymore." James blinked. "You were smart once," she said, "but you're still angry. Angry blinds you." He stared at her. She wasn't mocking. She was right. And she wasn't asking permission, she was declaring war. They went together. The room at the expo buzzed with predictable energy men in tailored suits. Women with sharp heels and sharper eyes, all sniffing for the next big pitch. James's name still had weight, if only the weight of scandal. He stepped onto the stage, cleared his throat, and spoke softly about failure, betrayal, and survival. About how the market was no longer driven by truth, but by noise. And then, halfway through, he turned to the crowd and said, "But there's someone here today who can see through the noise. Someone who taught me more in 1 week than 30 years of Wall Street ever could." Gasps. Confusion. He gestured to the side, and Leela stepped onto the stage. At first, silence. Then snickering. A child. This was his pitch, but then she began to speak. Not with flash, not with charm, with clarity. She walked through a theoretical model she'd been refining in notebooks scavenged from thrift stores and algorithm that used real-time social behavior to predict consumer volatility. She scribbled it out on a whiteboard with a permanent marker like it was graffiti on a wall. No one thought to protect, and the snickers stopped. A few executives leaned forward. One man raised a hand, frowning. "Are you saying you can forecast? Panic selling before it trends?" "Yes," Leela said. "If you know how to read online irrationality." "Data doesn't panic. People do." Another woman asked. "You're 12. Lila's eyes narrowed. "You're deflecting." James watched as the tide turned. He had walked in a fallen mogul. He was walking out the guardian of a mystery the market couldn't explain. After the event, investors swarmed. Business cards flew. A prominent hedge fund offered James a consulting role. He declined. "You said." "No," Leela asked later. "I said not yet." The world wasn't ready, but someone else was watching. 2 days later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a single line, typed in bold black font. "You don't know what you found." "But we do." James stared at it, hands cold. Leela read it over his shoulder and said nothing. But later that night, he saw her close every window, lock every door, and shove her old notebooks under the floorboards. For the first time since she entered his life, her voice trembled. "They found me," she whispered. And James realized this was no longer about redemption. This was about survival. The envelope sat on the counter for hours, unopened, even after they read its single line. James didn't throw it away. He didn't burn it. He just watched it like it might start breathing. "You don't know what you found." "But we do." 9 words, and everything in their fragile world shifted. Leela had grown quiet since it arrived. No longer critiquing the news or challenging James to chess games, she always won in 5 moves. She paced the apartment like a cat who sensed an earthquake beneath the floorboards, constantly checking windows, adjusting the blinds by 1-inch intervals, then rechecking again as if the threat wasn't who might be out there, but what they already knew. That night, James found her in the bathroom with a screwdriver, unscrewing the back of her old Casio watch. "Are you hiding something in there?" he asked gently. "No," she whispered. "I'm checking if someone else put something in." James didn't laugh. Not anymore. Instead, he sat across from her and asked the question he had been swallowing since the night she solved the algorithm. "Leela, who taught you everything you know?" She paused, then looked up with haunted eyes. "No one," she said. "I just remember things. Always have. I read a book once and I remember every word. Numbers aren't numbers to me. They're voices. They tell me when they're wrong. He leaned back. You're not just smart. You're wired differently, she said. Yeah, I know. James was still processing when the power flickered. Just once. Just long enough to make everything in the room feel colder. She tensed. So did he. They didn't sleep that night. The next morning, someone knocked. Not the impatient pound of a delivery driver. A rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Long pause. 1. James opened the door to find an envelope taped to the wall. No messenger. Just the wind. Inside were photos, grainy, zoomed-in shots of Leila walking to the library, buying a banana from a street vendor, standing at the window, framed like a target. There was a sticky note attached. We've been watching longer than you think. Leila turned white. James called the police. They took a report, shrugged and said, it's probably a prank. She's not in any system. No one's claimed her missing. You're not being targeted. But James had been targeted before by lawyers, federal agents, boardroom snakes in $1,000 suits. He knew what it felt like when something darker circled overhead. Later that evening, James pulled a box from his closet, one of the few things he'd saved from his old office. Inside was a black leather folder. Blackwood Capital, confidential. He opened it. 30 pages of audits, hidden accounts, side deals. Things he knew were illegal, but could never prove because Victor Blackwood had been 3 steps ahead. But now, he wasn't. Because James had something Victor didn't. Leila. He spread the documents across the kitchen table. Leila joined him, scanning them faster than any analyst he'd ever paid. Did you know he used shell corporations to bury equity swaps? She said without looking up. James stared. You understand this? Leila gave a short nod. It's not hard. It's just ugly. He moved money through 6 countries in 90 days. But he made a mistake here. She pointed to a handwritten notation. This name doesn't match the others. It's not a legal entity. It's a person. Who? She shrugged. Don't know. But we can find out. James smiled for the first time all day. I think I just found a way to get my life back, he said. But Leila didn't smile. Instead, she picked up one of the pages and flipped it over. On the back was a stamp, faded, almost invisible, but unmistakable. It read, Deep Signal. Leila's face changed. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. James saw the fear return. You know that name, he said. She nodded. It's not just financial, she whispered. It's governmental. It's military adjacent. I saw that stamp once before, on a file in a foster home. The next day, the file disappeared. The home burned down 3 months later. The kid they were watching, he vanished. James's pulse pounded in his ears. What does this mean? Leila stood slowly. It means Victor wasn't just laundering money for himself. She looked up at him, 12 years old and already carrying the weight of a world no one saw coming. He was laundering secrets. There was a long silence. Then she said, James, if we go after him, we won't just be fighting a man. We'll be fighting a machine. James stared at her, this strange, brilliant child who had walked out of an alley and turned his life upside down. A part of him wanted to run. Another part had already made the choice. We fight anyway, he said. Leila gave a slow nod. Then we'll need leverage, proof. We'll need allies. We'll need to disappear, she added, quietly, before they erase us first. And just like that, they became fugitives, not from crime, from truth. The kind of truth people get killed for. They vanished without a sound. No trace, no digital trail, no forwarding address. James, Reynolds, and Leila slipped beneath the radar like ghosts in the fog. James liquidated what little remained of his retirement in cash. Leila destroyed her old notebook and rebuilt it, page by page, in code no one else would recognize. A cipher hidden in doodles and riddles. Childlike on the surface, but encrypted with a logic only she understood. They settled in a rented cabin outside Milwaukee, remote, unremarkable, surrounded by trees that whispered like old spies. James grew a beard. Leila dyed her hair with shoe polish and lemon juice. The transformation was deliberate, but they weren't hiding. Not really. They were planning. Leila set up what she called a shadow system, a tangle of burner phones, encrypted drives, and signal bouncers that would confuse even advanced surveillance. It was like watching a symphony composed by paranoia and genius. James tried to keep up, but even he, once called the sharpest financial mind in the Midwest, knew he'd been outclassed. Why do you know how to do all this? He asked. One evening, as she reprogrammed a burner SIM card with a bent paperclip in sheer audacity, she looked up from the mess of wires, because someone taught me, before they disappeared. Who? A man named Harper. He said I wasn't safe, that I was wrong for the system. He kept me off the grid for 3 years. Then one day, he went to get batteries and never came back. James felt something ache inside him, the way a father does when he realizes a child knows too much too young. Do you think he's dead? He asked softly. Leila didn't answer. Instead, she turned the screen of her ancient laptop toward him. On it, a string of offshore account IDs tied to shell companies. Names James hadn't seen in years, buried in contracts and NDA clauses. At the center of them all, Blackwood Global Holdings. I followed the money, she said. Victor was funding something, not just through dummy accounts, but black asset networks. These names are linked to private intelligence firms, security, contractors, experimental labs. James stared at the screen, heart hammering. He wasn't laundering drug money. He was washing technology, military grade, possibly stolen. Leila nodded, and then she said something that chilled him to the bone. I don't think Victor betrayed you for money. I think he did it to disappear. The theory made too much sense. Victor didn't just want James out of the picture. He wanted him discredited, destroyed, erased. A man screaming into the void about fraud and conspiracy would never be believed. If he was also the poster child of public humiliation, and now, with Leila in the picture, Leila, whose brain could map encrypted data in her sleep, the stakes weren't just reputational, they were lethal. James leaned in. What if we leak this? We can't, she said. Not yet. No one will believe us. They'll bury the data and make it look like we faked it. Then what do we do? Leila looked up, her eyes sharper than ever. We flip the narrative. We play their game better. They began building a Trojan horse. Leila crafted a financial model, elegant, revolutionary, and wrapped in language that mimicked the tech Blackwood's companies once used. She used it to send bait, a data leak that looked like an accident, hinting at a breakthrough algorithm with military crossover potential. Within 48 hours, the dark web lit up. An anonymous buyer, operating under the moniker Spectre01, offered $10 million for a private demonstration. Leila smiled. That's him. That's Victor. He wants the tech back, but he doesn't know it's me. James frowned. And if he figures it out, she shrugged, he'll come for me. That night, while James slept restlessly, Leila sat awake, lit only by the soft glow of code scrolling down her screen. But her hands trembled, just once. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph, creased, water-stained. A man with a tired smile and kind eyes stood beside a little girl with storm-colored hair. Harper, she whispered, it's almost time. She folded the photo carefully and placed it back inside a hidden pocket in her notebook. A notebook that, if anyone else read it, might start a war. The next morning, they boarded a Greyhound to Washington, D.C. Leila looked out the window as frost curled across the glass. James sat beside her, clutching a USB drive with every detail of Blackwood's empire on it. And one final document Leila had uncovered that made his blood run cold. A contract, signed by Victor. Authorizing the transfer of a minor to a private institution. The name on the form, Leila, and the date, 2 weeks from now. They weren't just chasing Victor anymore. They were racing him, because somewhere out there, someone was preparing to take her back. At this time, they weren't planning on letting her survive. The bus rolled into D.C. just after 3 a.m. Cold rain slicked the streets, pooling like mercury under the yellow glow of flickering street lamps. James and Leila didn't check into a hotel. They didn't have time for sleep. They checked into a War.by for 15. They were seated inside a 24-hour diner on DuPont Circle, the kind of place that never turned off its neon, where the waitress didn't ask questions and the regulars wore their secrets in silence. Leila opened her laptop beneath the table and plugged in the encrypted drive. James watched the door like a soldier waiting for the first bullet. She was uploading the package, every stolen document, transaction trail, and offshore ledger. But the key wasn't the data. It was the trigger. If the upload is interrupted, Leila said calmly, in auto broadcast to 10 journalists, 5 government watchdogs, and 3 international leak platforms. James blinked. Where did you learn to build something like that? She gave him a look. James, I'm 12. You really think I learned this in school? He laughed, a short, hollow sound. Victor will come, she said, not because of the data, not even because of me. Then why? Because he thinks I belong to him, that he bought me. She tapped the keyboard, and the screen flashed with a name James hadn't seen before. Evox Labs, a biotech firm, defunct, but once funded by Blackwood Global. James scanned the screen, reading through the documents, the test programs, the psychological analyses, the neurological scans. Then he stopped cold. A file labeled Subject L13, Observational Intelligence Anomaly Leela. The reports went back years. Detailed, clinical, and human. Initial results confirm Subject L13 demonstrates synaptic response rates exceeding baseline human processing by 340%. Memory retention near perfect. Pattern prediction approaching AI standards. James nearly dropped the tablet. They were experimenting on you. Leela nodded slowly. They were tracking me since I was 4. That's when I was taken in by a foster couple. They called it a placement. I didn't know until later they were scientists, data collectors. I was part of a program designed to create synthetic intuition models. They wanted to turn my brain into a blueprint for predictive AI. She looked up at him with eyes far too calm for a child. I wasn't adopted. I was acquired. The door jingled. A man stepped inside. Tailored gray coat, black gloves, smile like razors. Victor Blackwood. James felt his throat go dry. The past rose around him like a black tide. Victor walked straight to their table and sat, as if joining old friends for coffee. I always admired your resilience, James, he said with an icy smile. Most men would have put a bullet in their mouth by now, but not you. You're still chasing justice, aren't you? James stayed silent. Leela didn't move. Victor turned to her. And you, my little project, you've grown sharper. Leela stared. I'm not your property. No, he said smoothly. You're the property of Deep Signal now, and they don't like loose ends. James reached beneath the table, hand tightening on the USB drive. You can't touch her. Victor raised a brow. James, you're a disgraced banker living in exile. She's an undocumented minor with no legal guardianship, and a stolen drive full of classified files. You really think you'll make it past the block? Leela smiled. Victor, she said softly, you should have read the terms of upload. Before he could respond, the waitress walked past with a pot of coffee. Want a refill? Sugar? Leela looked up sweetly. Yes, please. And could you also tell your manager to check the back server? The anonymous live stream just hit 50,000 viewers. Victor froze. The screen on Leela's laptop shifted. A blinking red dot appeared. Live, say hello to the world, she whispered. James watched Victor's face change from smugness to fury, then to something colder. Calculation. He stood. I hope you know what you've started, he said. Oh, Leela said with a grin. We're just getting started. He walked out. Within 2 hours, half of Capitol Hill had seen the documents. By sunrise, hashtag Deep Signal and hashtag Project L13 were trending worldwide. Whistleblower agencies were fighting for comment. News anchors struggled to explain what had been leaked. And the world began to realize it had underestimated a homeless girl and a ruined millionaire. The apartment was quiet that night. No sirens, no agents, just the hum of the fridge and the slow tick of the microwave clock. Leela sat beside James, curled in a blanket. He stared at her for a long time. I thought I was saving you, he whispered. You were, she replied. But I saved you, too. And in that fragile moment, under flickering kitchen lights, surrounded by empty takeout boxes and government secrets, James realized something. Legacy isn't about buildings with your name. It's about the people you stand beside when no one else will. And the girl beside him, she wasn't a victim. She was the star of a revolution.